The world is a pretty scary place these days. We could stand up here and I could ask you for all the chaos or disruptions that you're experiencing now. We've got a couple of wars going on. We've got a catastrophic climate crisis hitting us, on and on and on. What I'd like to do, and so it would be easy to start this session by talking about all these different things that we are waving our arms and trying to get our hands on. But I actually want to take a step back and contextualize all of those disruptors. And so I'm going to start with these five. And, well, actually, it'll only be five. Otherwise, this would be a 3-hour lecture. And so I want to talk about these five, and then I'm going to move into how we deal with them in the enterprise themselves. And the first one is deglobalization. And for 25 years, we have been pushing to embrace globalization. And there's now a huge pushback from that, and we're starting to walk that back. We certainly are now, countries are understanding and appreciating the importance of supply chains to delivering goods to their citizens. And certainly since COVID, that has become a really key piece for countries just to think legislatively and more strategically. Got too excited there. Labor 2.0, we are now in a labor change, both generationally and expectations. And what is expected from younger generations is different than older generations. Then, of course, we have regulatory changes. Some are good. What happens in the EU is great, and China's doing some great things. And what we do in the US is moving backwards. We seem to be proud of that fact. So we'll get into that. And then, of course, the AI flex. And I'm going to ask you to hold two oppositional thoughts on AI. It is absolutely overhyped, and people are talking about it ad nauseum. And I just can't open up LinkedIn these days anymore because it's just like dreadful. But on the other hand, it is real, it is legitimate, and it is changing the world we live in. So if you take nothing else away, understand that both can be true, and I would argue both are true. So deglobalization, we are on this great unwind where you start to see this move from predominantly China into other countries in that region. You see India on the rise, you see Brazil on the rise, and you see this whole friendshoring, nearshoring, whatever shoring, that is in reaction to this 25 years of globalization. And for those of you that are older like me, you remember the Thomas Friedman book, The World is Flat, and that became the marching guide for 20, 30 years. And while that had some benefits, it also made a very insecure way of operating supply chains. And we've learned that time and time again, because every time a ship gets stuck in a canal, in time there's attacks on shipping, et cetera, we understand the pain. And I think when historians look back at Brexit, and so when I'm talking in 30, 40, 50 years, I think one of the points that they will come to understand of the difficulties, if not failures, of Brexit was a lack of appreciation of the supply chain issues that it would cause. That's a hypothesis, but watch that over the coming years. There's already a lot of regret, but that stems from this ability to not be part of this broader world. That was not a political comment, by the way. Although I was joking with my driver on the way in, and he's like, you said it, not me. So, but geopolitics certainly have driven this, and a large push on nationalism, populism, and while that sort of ebbs and flows, it makes it really hard to run a business, much less a supply chain in these worlds. And for multinationals, which most of you are associated with directly or indirectly, it's really hard. And this idea that we would be one multinational in a particular region and then sell to every region is being rethought. It has to be rethought because the world has changed. Now, national supply chain prioritization. Just to set the context for this, the Russia Federation right now is learning a very painful lesson about supply chain logistics. And if you look closely, there will be a lot of lessons learned. They're learning the same thing that Napoleon learned the hard way, Nazi Germany learned the hard way, is that it's difficult to do extended, far-flung operations without really good logistics networks. And so what's happened is you started to, and traditional logic of concentrating a bunch of logistics centers, hub and spoke like we do in the business world, makes you very susceptible to attacks, and it becomes a very inviting target. And so understanding supply chains as a strategic national objective is all the think tanks are really looking at this issue of understanding that. So that means policy will continue to change in how every country views their supply chain, which is a dramatic change. Again, supply chain has been this sort of off to the side thing, but it's come to national prominence. And we saw it for during COVID, but more and more we see this, and especially when we talk about what's happening with the Red Sea and the Houthi attacks on commercial shipping, and we're getting a lot of us are getting a geography lesson in how goods move or don't move. So it's important, but it certainly is a strategic national priority for everybody. All right. Labor force 2.0. Now this is hard to quantify. I will say in the US, we certainly, well, first off, we have a generational change. There's no doubt about this, and I'll have a chart on a second. But understand that the objectives of the younger generation are not the same. You see this in China with the lay flat syndrome, or phenomenon, that's what I'm looking for, is where the certain generation is not interested in working as hard as their parents. We see that certainly in the US, and just this generational change of what are we chasing? What are we chasing? I was having breakfast with somebody this morning, and are we chasing hedonism? Are we chasing the ability to fly on private jets? And I am, by the way, but I will never get there. But one of the at the World Economic Forum every year, it's not a surprise that you have all these luminaries and rich people flying to Davos in private jets, and they're the most polluting way of getting there. So there's this disconnect. And the younger generation sees that, even though the older generation doesn't quite want to do that. And in the US, we're having a reconciliation around labor movements, where there's been very, very anti-union, and we're starting to see those changes. And I would just say, and I'll keep reinforcing this, if you're over 40, this is not about you anymore, and you have to change that mindset. This is not, and I'm not being a generational determinist, and I'm not poking at you. You're not wrong. I'm old. But this is not about us anymore. This is about facilitating the next generation. So why do I say that? So this is the US, but this is the baby boomers in the US are exiting the workforce very fast. Now this matters because they have held these positions of middle management, senior leadership, executives, and they are exiting fast. Now, Gen Xers, we've kind of come across, I'm of course a Gen Xer, and we've come across and we've plateaued. And we'll be there for a few more years or a lot more years, depending on the state of the US economy. But we have kind of hit our plateau. And millennials have kind of right behind us, and that's good. Like millennials, we're just kind of there. And over time, of course, the millennials will probably spike up a little bit. But Gen Z is now in the workforce. They're bypassing boomers in the workforce. And Gen Z is wildly different, and I'll prove that to you in a moment. So they are wildly different. So when we talk about systems design, when we talk about experience, there's no better way to tell your people that are under 40 that you hate them by giving them an SAP interface. And I showed an example last year, but nobody goes to work looking to and enjoying SAP. And those of us over 40, we just accept it because that was kind of the way it is, and we've become acculturated. If you're under 40, you look at SAP or Oracle and you think, WTF, like this is not okay. All right. I didn't intend to use that word, but. All right. So regulatory changes. The EU does a great job, as I said. You're trying to tackle climate change, data privacy, AI regulation. Unfortunately, in the US, which is a big player in this, we have gone backwards. In most business contexts, you can no longer talk about DEI because you don't know who around the room of executives, or doesn't matter, you don't know. It's become a political situation, and if you bring it up, you're likely, the odds are you'll get at least 30% of that room that thinks it's garbage, that it's just a political woke, if you will, whatever. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but the data suggests that DEI is good, but in some states it's actually outlawed to have DEI. So there is a tension between what the rest of the world's doing and what the United States is doing. And the election in November might change some of that, but I actually don't think it will, because no matter who wins, it'll either be on the agenda to dismantle DEI and probably all of our work on climate change, but also if the other person wins, we are going to get a huge backlash amongst the citizens. So just to be contrarians. So we have challenges in the U.S. that do make this a problem. And there's been a number, Harley Davidson, I forget, one of the beverage companies, they've come out and publicly said we're dismantling our DEI programs. And all the states a lot of the states are doing the same. So this is problematic in terms for businesses to run business. All right. Then we have the AI flex. And it is real, and it is also overhyped. And both can be true, both are true, but it is changing procurement and supply chain. And I'm going to spend a lot of time now talking about the underpinnings of this, because this is really important, especially from a people point of view. I'm going to talk a lot more about the people here going into this next section. All right. So I experienced the future earlier this year. And so I took my first robo-taxi. And in San Francisco, we have Waymo, this company, it's owned by Google, and they have robo-taxis that run across the city. And it's like Uber or Lyft. You have an app on your phone, and you say, I want to go from here to there, and it sends a robo-taxi. And that's a picture of one. And so what it does is the car shows up, it finds a spot to park that's safe, and then you unlock the car with the app, and then you get in, you close the door, and you hit the start button, and it zooms you off to your destination. And the first time you sit down, the first reaction is like, oh my God, there's nobody driving this car. And the second is, this is amazing, I love this, because you can control the temperature and the radio, and you don't have to have some odd conversation with the driver. There's no weird smells. It's just, even if they're coming from you. So you don't have to worry about any of that. And once you take one, you realize that I'm never taking a Lyft or Uber again if I can avoid it. It's just so pleasurable. But then you have this other realization. Oh my God, once this scales properly, Lyft and Uber drivers are in real trouble, because automation is absolutely going to obliterate that. Last mile delivery, for sure. And then you realize, wow, this is really changing. And so they're rolling this out, and it's just a scale problem. It's not a technology problem. And so when you start to have these in all the cities, this is going to really take off and change the economy. And it will certainly obliterate parts of the gig economy. And I don't think that can be understated. And it's really important that we understand this. All right. Now, there is a lot of hype. So there is a lot of hype. But there's a reason there's a lot of hype is because there's a lot of money. So, and this is hard chart to sort of, there's a lot going on. Silicon Valley Bank created this. Yes, that same Silicon Valley Bank. but they've charted over time the amount of investments in different technologies. So the blue line is this dark blue line that goes up and then down. That's e-commerce, and Amazon pretty much owns that by 2004, 2005. They've kind of solved that. Then you get the light blue line, which is mobile technology, which has its apogee in about 2013, 2014, and that's when we all got smartphones, and so there's no need to invest much more in that. Clean tech is kind of like, and I know Oliver's here, but clean tech is kind of like stalled. It's kind of stalled out. And then the bottom right is the red is crypto, which if you're into crypto, well, good luck. But the investment there is not happening. But this other blue line, the one that goes up, the green line that is shaded, that's AI investment. And it's already bypassed what mobile technology got at its height. And we are just starting. And if you don't believe me, come to San Francisco. This is all centered in San Francisco. You can take a robo-taxi and you can see, like you go to a coffee shop, people are talking about their AI startups. You could just overhear it. This is like 1999 San Francisco when everybody had an idea for a .com. And so the investment funds, the one going up is AI investment funds. So that's bigger funds that are pushing, not just, and the one in white that is tanking is crypto. So this is real, and it's real because there's money going into it. Now, that said, there is hype, but I also want you to just hold that. Hold both thoughts, because they both are true. All right, so we're on the quest to understand how this AI technology changes our day-to-day living. And so yesterday, yesterday was Sunday. And I woke up and I had a 2 o'clock nonstop flight from San Francisco to Amsterdam. I thought, this is great. I'm just gonna chill out, get there, and no problem. And so I woke up, and of course, my flight had been canceled. So it set in motion a whole chaos of trying to get rebooked and try to get here on time, et cetera, et cetera. And underpinning all of those interactions I had with the United agent and the this and the that were largely autonomously driven. And a lot of the communication was autonomous, and it was intelligence. And there was all these algorithms working to underpin what happened yesterday. And of course, my trip itself. And so I'd like to sort of give you this visualization. So think about an Amazon warehouse. For the most part, they're automated, especially the newer ones. You have the autonomous forklifts, the little Kiva robots that move big shelves around. And the few people that do, or the hundreds of thousands of people they have do working, they have these little scanners. And the scanners tell them what to do. So the managers that manage a group on the floor or a section or even the whole facility, the managers, their job is not to tell the people what to do. This little handheld device tells the people what to do. Tells them where to go, where to not go. It actually will move the shelves to the person with the scanner, tell them to pull this, pick that, and put it over there. So if there's a problem, a labor problem, it's not the manager's fault. Think about that. The factory workers from years past, when they would strike, they'd be mad at management because that guy sitting up in the manager's spot is hurting the factory workers, or he's pushing us too hard, or whatever the issue is. It's a labor problem. But in this case, there is no manager. Everything is driven by some set of algorithms that feed that little scanner, that feed the various autonomous moving parts. So now warehouses are becoming, as they become automated, there is a change in how we think about the labor and how they work. So if you have a grievance, who's your grievance at? Not the manager, but certainly the algorithm. But who's creating the algorithm? It's in some cases, it's mathematical. And we should be able to do X and Y in this amount of time, and we're going to track it. And this is a fundamental change in how we think about the labor force. It's going to be largely algorithmically driven. So that's a good segue, so we're going to start talking about people now. Because when I say that, it's like, well, what's that mean? Well, that's a good question, so let's delve into that. So I took a 2-month sabbatical this summer to start work on my next book. And I had big plans. I was going to write every day, and I was going to get to a certain level because I have to have a prospectus done in 2 weeks because I'm meeting a key person in 2 weeks. So I'm going to spend all summer, and so that was the plan, right? Get really far in my new book. Well, what I actually did was watched 104 hours of YouTube and 87 hours of TikTok. And so that's 1 hour and 40 minutes of YouTube a day and 1 hour and 24 minutes of TikTok a day, which doesn't sound like that much, but if you factor in eating and dog walks and I'm not sure I had much time for much else. So, and I learned a lot of great things through this process. But what I realized is that that I am too old for TikTok. At least it's not designed for me. Because when I started to break it down, I started to realize that this is a great way to consume news. I was getting a different news stream than my wife, who does more traditional news media, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And I, 3 days into my sabbatical, that's when President Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris became the nominee. And I saw more memes about Kamala Harris and Vice President Harris, and she was just dominating TikTok. And I didn't even have to check the news because I knew it because it went lightning fast and it was repetitious. The thing about TikTok is you'll see one video about this, and then you see a couple of the random things, and then a couple more about about the election. It's this constant feed of information, which changes how we consume news. Then, of course, this summer was the brat summer, which is all this Gen Z vernacular, and I learned this the language because it was used on all these videos, and I became acculturated to it. I still don't know what half the things mean, and you'll never catch me using them. However, it was fascinating anthropologically to study. Just as a sidebar, that guy there, that's Ben Boyce. He's a New Zealand personality. If you get a chance to see him on YouTube or TikTok, he does this thing where he embarrasses his daughters. He goes to a drive-through, and he films this. He goes through a drive-through and orders using Gen Z language while his daughters, who are teenagers or 10, 12, and they're freaking out. And so it's a great way to waste a lot of time, but he's hilarious. And if you want to learn Gen Z language, all right. This is a cultural touchstone. One of the things in Vice President Harris, in her TikToks, one of the things she became popular, she actually won TikTok in the summer because there were all these great clips of her dancing and meeting people, doing fun things that nobody thought would actually turn into anything. And then all of a sudden, when she became the nominee, there were all these memes out there, and at least the ones I saw, very positive and fun, and it became a cultural touchstone. And you sort of take these together. When I would talk to my wife about, oh my God, Harris did this and that, and da-da-da-da-da-da, and she'd look at me like, what are you talking about? Because in the news cycle, the main news cycles, they were not picking it up as fast as it was coming on TikTok. But by the way, this is, for those of you that are over 40, this is different because when we grew up, there were these must-see TV moments because there were only 7 channels or 12 channels, and things like the Super Bowl were big events. And now there are way more cultural touchstones, and our focus is, or foci are fractured. So it's important to note that. It's also addicting. So I think this is just a public service announcement because it can be very addicting to watch this. And don't watch it before bed because you'll end up 3 hours later not able to sleep. And then finally, bite-sized learning. And one of the keys to learning is repetition and being able to draw back. And whether by design or not, the YouTube algorithm will show you something, 3 steps that I learned about financial stability. And then it'll show me random other things, and then it'll come back and show me another financial one. And what it's doing, it's training the brain to help me learn these bits. So it's important to understand that you can learn this way in a way that, because it's very social and it's very repetitious. Now I'm sure you're all wondering, how did I break my, my writer's block? How did I actually get back to my book? Well, what I did is I started tracking my activity. And this is something I've been doing for a while now. And you can see, so I have different measures for the date, day of the week. Did I read for 30 minutes a day? Daily writing, 30 minutes a day. Daily video, 30 minutes a day. Crossword, stretching, self-care, what's my location, et cetera, et cetera. And what that did is it started to give me a data set in which to understand my writing process. And you can see the yellows are, you can see there's a lot of yellows on reading and a lot of yellows on writing, which means I didn't do those very often. You could tell when I'm into a really good book, because then all the reading becomes blue because I'm just constantly reading the book. The writing is always just up and down. So what this does is this really now gives me some data to work with. And then what I did is I took the data from my watch and added it to this data set. And now I can actually understand how I'm spending my time and what makes for good writing conditions. And I can go further and further. And where I'm building to is I want you to become comfortable with data and love data. And in fact, when I talk about algorithms, we need to start thinking about how we take even the most basic of data and become data scientists ourselves. Because looking at data is fun. Now, I like to use this because there are a number of companies that I consult with that still don't have good spend visibility. And I don't know how, after 20 years, we can't have good spend visibility. Somebody laughed, so I won't put them on the spot. But, I mean, it's fun. Mark's here from J&J. I would love nothing more than to just spend the afternoon looking at their data set. I mean, this is my Amex bill. In the first half of this year, I spent $48,000 with United Airlines. That's pretty interesting. Actually, I should qualify that. Carney spent $48,000. I spent $18,000 with Delta Airlines. So just in 6 months, I spent that much. I mean, how interesting is that? What would J&J's data set look like, or whoever else is here? Kenview's here. Like, what's their data look like? It's fascinating. So why do we fear the data? It's fun. This should get us out of bed in the morning. And I would argue that one of the reasons is we get stuck in all these random blockers. Think about writing block. And so what I did is I've sort of deconstructed the data value chain. And I think this helps because this is important to what we're trying to achieve with supplier experience. Don't worry, we'll get back there. So we have data, and I just showed you data. Well, if I visualize the data, I have charts and graphs, and that tells me what's in the data, and that's great. But it hasn't told me anything about the business. So I spent $48,000 with United and $18,000 with Delta. That's what that visualization showed us. So what's that mean? That means nothing to Carney or me or the business. It just means we've spent that much money. And by the way, the money's already been spent. So what's that tell us? Nothing. So if we started to do analysis, which is statistical modeling, and if we looked at a long enough data set of my travel history, we could understand what my purchasing habits are and where my hometown is, et cetera, and we can start to do more analysis, and that actually gets us to a destination that we want to be. But that doesn't change anything. Knowing that my propensity to buy from United doesn't change any outcome. It just says, hey, Elouise likes United. Great. But it's not until we combine that with strategy that we get intelligence. And that's the difference, where if we look at it across the board, that everybody buys United and our contracts with Delta, then we have a problem. Actually, Carney's is with American Airlines, so we have a problem. We have an outlier. But nobody actually, our category managers don't actually come to me and say, you know, you're spending a lot of money off, with a non-preferred supplier. Not that I would care, but this is where we have to get from, and almost all quote-unquote procurement analytics is stuck in the visualization. We get stuck in that visualization. And so what I would hypothesize or argue or advocate is that if you have access to the data, you can be a data scientist. You can do all of this. Not only are the tools much better, but with Gen AI, there are exponentially, at our fingertips, we have these tools. And so I would argue that you may be a data scientist if you enjoy data. It's pretty fun that looking at what I spend versus United versus Delta, that's pretty fun. I'm sure my hotels would tell a much different story. If you use Excel, you might be a data scientist. You do not have to be a mathematician or a wizard with a PhD in statistics to be a data scientist. In fact, if you use Excel, you can be a data scientist. This is about comfortability with data and using the analysis. If you wonder how and why big tech knows everything about you, you might be a data scientist. I talked about the algorithms, looking at Amazon, how they use algorithms. I want you to start to think about the algorithms in your life and how they're working. If you do online gaming or online shopping, you could be a data scientist because you are embodying these same techniques. And of course, if you use ChatGPT or any of them. But this is data science is now within all of our grasps. It's not hire some operations research PhDs. This is, if you take nothing else away, well, my second take nothing else away, I don't know if you can have two, but anyway, is be comfortable with the data. For one sheer reason, if we're going to build strong supply chains with resilient supply chains, green supply chains, we have to interrogate supplier data in a way we've never done before. Never. And it's not just your top 100 suppliers, it's your top 1,000 suppliers. And so while I framed it as being a data scientist, I want you to take that same fervor into your supplier data, because this is what the future is. And this is not something you are going to learn from a catalog. So you can take all your procurement academies and throw them in the trash, because they are not teaching anybody anything. This is not how people learn. And so the reason is, well, it's worth noting that all of these skills that underpin your procurement academies, they're yesterday's skills. You're going to see 100 different startups tomorrow that are automating some portion of this. These are yesterday's skills. So you need to stop pretending you can teach all of the skills in 4 hours. This is not who we're hiring. This is not the work to be done. We need to start hiring these skills. People that love data, the intellectual curiosity. Just in my couple slides there, we did a little bit of interesting data and intellectual curiosity. What's the story we tell about that? What's the visual literacy? The way we are communicating, and back to my TikTok example, the way we communicate globally has changed. We have to be much more visually literate. I talked about the memes around Vice President Harris. We have to understand short form writing, long form writing, short form writing, the art of storytelling. I bet you all will remember that I spent $48,000 with United. That will resonate because you've heard it multiple times, but it's also the story that was wrapped in, especially if you do any sort of spend analysis. You'll always come back to that. By the way, that was only in 6 months, and at the end of the year, I'm going to see how much I spent overall. I want you to understand these 3 bits, because this is important. When we are presented with new material, you will lose 70% of it by the time you leave this room. or any room, tomorrow, anytime. New material, instantaneously, most of it's gone. And so good job for this, you taking pictures, because that helps reinforce that, or taking notes. But that's why that's important. But more importantly, if you don't go back to that picture or those notes, or you don't have reinforcement, the other 30% within a month will be gone. It'll be gone. So all these great nuggets of wisdom I give you today will be all gone in a month. Isn't that great? But our brains do not retain Zoom. We are physiological beings. So being here in person, there is a connection that we are making. That's why in-person events feel so different. And we don't learn from Zooms, manuals, or whatnot. All right, so to close out, I'm just going to pull it all together. The reality of the world we live in is chaotic. You cannot predefine it. Just like my flight yesterday, I thought I was going to roll out of bed and have a great day, and I had a chaotic day that made me fly to Seattle and then over to Amsterdam. And anyway, that's not the reality of the world we live in. So we cannot script that. And the problem that I have, and everybody that knows me knows that I have an issue with big source-to-pay providers, because they're built on this idea you can predefine everything. You can predefine almost nothing because of the chaos of the world that we live in. And I'll give you a good example, Netflix. If you have a Netflix account, I guarantee you it's different than my Netflix account. And it's not because it's got one for me and you and you and you and you. It's because it's an intelligent system that is learning. We seed it with some information, our zip code, our gender, whatever, and then it changes based on our habits. In fact, I would argue probably no two Netflix accounts are the same, because it's always changing. And so this is when we start thinking about supplier experience or even requisitioner experience, we need to start thinking like this, in these terms. Now, most clients that I work with have processes that look like this. And if that looks painful and difficult, it is. It is exactly that. And you see that data goes from system to system. At one point, it gets cut and pasted manually, which drives me absolutely crazy. So you have all of these different movements. And the reason we do this, the reason consultants and systems integrators spend so much time doing this and costing you so much money, is because we've had to predefine these workflows and then hard code them into the system. And any source-to-pay implementation, even big ERP, you spend all this time predefining what is in essence non-definable. You cannot predefine this, because once this gets hard-coded into the system, try changing it. It'll take you 6 months, a year, 18 months. That's not the world we live in. We live in a world, think back to the Netflix. There is no hard-coded process. Netflix and you as the user work it out yourselves. And so what I'd ask you to do is think about system design and whatever systems you deploy as breaking this all up, and how do we set the start point, the end point, and the constraints. We can't have chaos, but we cannot predefine everything, because the moment you define something, the world changes, or the business changes, and we have to scrap it. So we need much more extendable systems and intelligent systems. So I'm going to leave you with some homework. I would like you to develop algorithmic literacy and understand how algorithms are changing your life or guiding your life or manipulating your life, and ask, what's the algorithm's motivation? What's its bias? How do I validate the output? Because it's one thing to identify it, but actually oftentimes this technology is still being developed, and so a lot of people can use that to game systems. And so I'd ask you to start asking these questions of the algorithms you encounter. Back to my wife again. She goes to Amazon or when she buys airline tickets, it drives her crazy that one day she'll find a price for X amount for this ticket, and the next day she'll look for that ticket, and it'll have gone up or down dramatically, not related to any, the number of tickets available. This dynamic pricing is driving her crazy. And so fix your data. This is as mentioned, in the opening, you cannot use data, you have bad data as an excuse. This is 2024, we're almost in 2025. Do not, for goodness sakes, do not invite me in and tell me you have bad data, because I am going to do nothing but harp on that point for the entirety of the session. So, and I will hold CPOs accountable, because bad data is a leadership failure. That is a leadership failure. And so if you want to actually get going on this, the AI will clean your data. And I'll show you in just one second. Don't worry, I'm almost done. But once you have good data, you can start to build your own bespoke AI applications. The power of Gen AI and ChatGPT, and I'm not trying to oversell it, it is truly powerful when you get into it. And the idea that we could create our own applications is amazing. So I like to examine the YouTube algorithm, the LinkedIn algorithm, and the Facebook algorithm. They are really good examples of they react to whatever you do. So if you want to learn, I recommend doing that. And I'll just say that within 18 months, we're going to have all the technology we could possibly absorb within the enterprise. In fact, we might be there today, but certainly within 18 months, we are just overwhelmed with the amount of technology. So the issue is not technology. Now, technology will keep going, it'll develop, and that's all good. The problem is apathy in Excel. And so this is really a people issue. It's a leadership issue. And so why I talk so much about the people and trying to bring the people along and demystify concepts like data science is because it's apathy and it's Excel that's holding us back. And so I would say if you want to build the next generation supply chain, you need to orchestrate or think orchestration or algorithmic-based orchestration, intelligence. We need to create intelligence on our suppliers, and that will give us supplier connectivity and experience. And what I would just say in closing, if you think I am full of nonsense talking about Gen AI, I started with a series on me recording myself learning Gen AI to see if this is real. And so for the good, the bad, the ugly, you can see me. So that's, feel free to follow me on YouTube, but you can see a Gen Xer actually plunking their way to figure this all out. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much, Elouise. I'm shocked to learn I'm a data scientist after all these years. So we absolutely have time for questions, probably about 10 minutes or so max. So please, if you have questions for Elouise, do say so. And this helps. This is a microphone, and I will throw it towards you.
We got one in the back.
One in the back. I saw.
Okay, there's one.
Oh, there. You ready? I do play rugby, so it's coming your way. Actually, I don't play rugby. What am I talking about? There you go.
Oh, it works as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, as you know, Dr. Elouise, with a lot of what you say and a lot of your content. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about was specifically around bringing new generations of the workforce into the profession. How do we do that and make procurement and supply chain interesting when, number one, we don't really have degree courses in university campuses, and number two, just the descriptions that get churned out of jobs are just completely uninspiring. You know, if there was one tip I would give to anyone that's a recruiting manager, it would be don't let HR anywhere near your job descriptions and get a marketing person to write it. So how do you think we can address that challenge?
Yeah, well, on one hand, we need university programs in procurement. We barely have them in supply chain. They're starting to mature, but we also need them in procurement. Sidebar, I was asked by Carney to come up with 10 ideas for the future for Carney, and I said one of them is we should sponsor a class or a program at a university to help develop procurement. They didn't like that idea, but that might hold water. But so it'll come eventually, much like it did for supply chain programs. How do we market it? I mean, the reason I use that Amex example is, and the United in 48,000, like, it is fascinating. I mean, wouldn't you want to know where these big companies spend their money? I mean, even if you're going to go be the CEO someday, like, this is like that. No better way to understand how a business operates than to look at where it spends its money. And so there's a big tech company, shall we say, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of them, but that has been all about driving revenue since its inception. And now the CEO has come to the realization, why am I spending all this money on X or Y or Z? And so he has now charged the CPO with getting a handle on all of this. And it'll be an exciting story once the CPO is sort of done. And I agree, get marketing people. There's almost nothing more dreadful than reading procurement job descriptions. And I read them. And whenever they get posted online, I read them. Because they're not advertising for tomorrow's skills. They're advertising yesterday's skills. And so if we go out there and talk about how are we going to do this category management, like, category management, I don't need to know that. There's tools, there's plenty of tools that can just guide me through the category management process. So it is, I will summarize by saying this is a branding issue. We need to start seeing ourselves as tall people, not short people, or big L table versus little L table, and we control this. This is our own to change.
Did you want to pass it that way?
Several mics on, but hopefully this one works. So we've got the unenviable task of following you in a second to talk about sustainability. So I'm always loved your work, and I'm intrigued about your thoughts on sustainability data and how procurement uses that, and whether there's anything that you think we should cover in our next panel.
So I love sustainability information, but there is a general, it's in its nascent stages. And we can't agree on what the metrics are, and we had to come up with science-based target initiatives. So it's all over the map, and I think, again, it's just a maturity thing. And so we need that to mature. And then there's a question of, well, we've reduced our carbon footprint by 20% or 100%, but like, that's not really possible, and we're carbon neutral or whatever. So there's a lot of skepticism, and I think the one thing I would say is, how do you get past the skepticism? And we know we need to do it, or at least most of us know we need to do it, but that doesn't mean, like, a few naysayers can really derail the whole thing. And if certain political parties win in November in the US, we will absolutely 100% pull every bit away out of every clean sort of energy effort. So anyway, I'll try not to get political there, but the underpinning that is skepticism, and there really has to be a belief. Not I'm thumping you on the head to say you have to do it because you're bad and the environment needs it. So on one hand, get past the skepticism. The other is, I'll try to say this without embarrassing anybody. I did that, not a client, but anyway, a company. But if you show me a 100% recyclable bottle, and you want credit for that as sort of contributing to sustainability, I'm not giving you credit, because it's good that you did that, but now you're dependent on the consumer to then put it in the recycling bin to make sure it gets to the recycling center. And in the recycling center or the waste center, it's got to get reclaimed and then put back into the different value chains. So too often our sustainability, what we champion, is just one end of an entire value chain. So I'd like to hear you talk about the value chain, not just what this bottling company or beverage company did to create a sustainable bottle.
Okay. Any other questions?
Oh, you let me off the
Can't
hook
be done.
easy.
No?
I wasn't controversial enough. All right.
There's one in the front, Marielle. Thank you.
Hello. I'm not used to speak to micro. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, how do you recommend to address the supplier experience within an organization? Because today the organization is organized conventionally by procurement, supply chain, different departments. However, the supplier journey, supplier experience, I see it as more co-functional process that overcome all of these departments. So I was wondering, how do you recommend to address the supplier experience within an organization, and not to take in isolation with procurement, supply chain, and different departments?
So how to get the suppliers to the different places, or?
To address supplier in an organization when you have different ownership,
Oh,
procurement, supply chain.
when you don't have
accounting.
ownership of the suppliers?
Yeah. Or is there any organization today who is? It's not in our organization, so I was wondering, is there any way to recommend, or already organization addressing the supplier differently than is the conventional way?
Yeah, so there are organizations, typically it's tier 1 suppliers, that do a really good job of integrating and managing the suppliers. However, and this might be a little off of what you asked, but what happens a lot with suppliers is procurement's on the back end, and we have, like, the negotiations happened, or the supplier has been sort of agreed to, or we get brought in at the last minute. And it's important to understand that, so we are at a disadvantage when we get brought in. It's like, oh, I'm going to hire her. Like, now procurement, you go deal with it. So we haven't actually done the formal process. And so how do we get good data from that person and give them a good supplier experience? Because when we do that, then the business is not likely to, if we make it easy for the business, they'll do the right thing. Too often we make it hard for the business. And just because I can't help myself, one client made the mistake of inviting Carney to an RFP using SAP Ariba. And the mistake was they invited me to respond to the survey, or to the event. And when I logged in, the first thing I saw was 21 versions of Carney as a supplier record. And it said, which Carney are you? Like, how the heck do I know? Like, you're asking me? I hardly know, my name. What do I know about Carneys? And of course, I took a screenshot of it, and I used it in every steering committee, and we won the business. And I kept bringing this back up the entire time. I wouldn't let it go. And in fact, I don't think the person's here. But I never miss an opportunity to point that out. And it's because it's so painful that we just bypass the system, and then we figure out a way around. And so if we can make it easy to transact, then you can get better management.
Yep, we've got time for just one more on the end there.
I'll give a quick answer.
That's right.
Okay, I'm curious about the quick answer then. No, when you showed your slide before with the robotaxi, you could have probably shown the same slide 10 years ago, and people would have not known what the robotaxi is, but they would have seen the Tesla in the background.
Yeah.
And you could have said the same story. The future is here. Look, there's a Tesla. My question is, we're thinking always of tomorrow, and we're extrapolating things we can observe today to think about it. So the robotaxi, 10 years ago, nobody would have known. But today, we are seeing ChatGPT and Anthropic, so we can extrapolate that trend and say, okay, where will AI get us? My question to you, how can we even get started about thinking the day after tomorrow? So maybe except watching an hour and a half of YouTube and an hour and a half of TikTok a day, but what are things we can do to think beyond tomorrow to see those trends that we don't observe today?
Yeah, I think it's hard to do that, and if we could do that, a lot more of us would be rich. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but I'd also say there are things that we can't imagine today. So when Steve Jobs debuted the iPad, I was like, what a dumb product. Like, there is nobody wants this. I got this smartphone, the iPhone's great, I've got a laptop. Who needs an iPad? And now the iPad is my most used device, and I had no idea I wanted it. So that day after tomorrow, that is the person that is creative and innovative enough will come up and push that idea. What's important, though, is to understand that that you're right. There is a day after tomorrow, and I'm probably less concerned about that because I want to get everybody on the journey to tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow. But it's a fair point. And also that's why I started by talking about concepts like deglobalization and nationalization of supply chains, and et cetera, because those are more indicators of the day after tomorrow, but which is your question, not just tomorrow. Like we know there's going to be another war tomorrow. Hopefully not, but we know statistically there will be. But the day after that, I don't know what it'll be. So, but if you figure it out, you can make a lot of money. So,
excellent.
Thank you.
I think we are done. Thank you very much, Elouise.
Thank you.